My daughter declared me unfit for her grand Christmas celebration and told me to go celebrate alone. But when her refined in-laws turned on the evening news and saw what I had done, it rattled their polished world and shocked the entire city. After that, she tried frantically to reach me. 93 missed calls. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. The paper of my gift bag bent like wrinkled fabric as I stood at the towering doorway on Ashbury Street. When Lydia opened the door, her face flickered, half a second of hesitation, before she pasted on that perfect smile she uses when she doesn't want anyone to see what she's really thinking. "Dad, what a surprise. You came all this way." Her voice was light, too light, like crystal that could crack if touched too hard. I stepped into the house, and my old boots squeaked against the marble, a sound that didn't belong here. The air itself smelled expensive, like polished wood and perfumes I couldn't name. Every corner glistened with wealth, chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls, silver-framed mirrors reflecting back my rough coat, and chairs that looked like they'd collapse if anyone dared to sit the wrong way. I pulled out the tin I had carried carefully all the way on the bus. "Cinnamon cookies, Lydia. Your mother's recipe. Thought you'd like a taste of the old Christmases we used to share." "Oh, thank you, Dad. That's thoughtful." She took the tin but set it aside, unopened, her hands already moving to straighten her pearls. "Come, sit down. Damien's parents are due to arrive soon, but we have a moment." Her heels clicked sharply as she led me into a living room that belonged in a magazine. A white sofa that looked untouched. A fireplace framed in marble, tall windows flooding the room with cold winter light. She poured tea into cups so thin, I thought they might shatter in my hands. "So, Dad, what brings you here tonight?" I eased into a chair, the cushions swallowing me whole. I thought maybe we could spend Christmas Eve together, the way we used to. Hot chocolate, old movies, just us. Remember? Her spoon stirred sugar into her cup, though I never saw her take a sip. "That's sweet, but Damien's parents are coming tonight. Victor and Eliza, you know, they're very sophisticated. Conversations can get quite intellectual. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. The word hit harder than she knew. I looked at my daughter, the girl who once begged me to build blanket forts, who once cried if bedtime stories ended too soon, and realized I was no longer welcome in the world I had sacrificed everything to give her. Her words echoed in the polished silence of that room, bouncing off the tall windows and the expensive chandelier until they settled heavy on my chest. She smiled politely, the way someone does when they're ending a conversation with a stranger, not their own father. I set my tea down without drinking, my hand trembling slightly, though I hoped she didn't notice. I wanted to remind her of who I was, the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who stitched her torn school uniform with hands cracked from factory work, who saved every penny to get her through college. But in that moment, all she seemed to see was someone who didn't belong. I leaned forward, trying one more time. "Lydia, it's Christmas Eve. We always spent it together, even when times were hard. Remember how we'd wrap old lights around the banister, even if half the bulbs didn't work? We laughed more in those little moments than most families do in mansions." Her eyes darted to the hallway, as if checking to make sure no one had overheard. "Dad, please don't misunderstand. It's not about the past. It's just... Tonight's not the right night. Victor and Eliza are very particular about their gatherings. They value intellectual discussions, debates on art and politics. You'd feel out of place, and I don't want you to feel that way." "Out of place." She said it again. I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the untouched tea. Out of place was how I had felt standing in the crowd at her graduation, while her classmates, dressed in suits their parents had bought, barely noticed the man in the worn blazer who had skipped meals so she could afford textbooks. Out of place was how I had felt at her wedding when the photographer barely angled me into the frame, as though I were a distant relative and not the father who raised her alone after Ruth passed away. I forced a smile, one I knew she wouldn't see past. "I see. I wouldn't want to disrupt your evening. I'll head home then." She reached out as if to soften her dismissal, but her fingers stopped just short of touching mine, adjusting her bracelet instead. "Dad, you know I love you, right?" Her voice was gentle, but it carried the tone of obligation, not conviction. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My chair scraped softly against the marble floor as I stood, the sound too raw for such a pristine space. I picked up my gift bag, the cookies still inside, rejected before they were even tasted. For a second, I considered leaving them anyway, a small reminder of where she came from, but I knew they'd end up in the trash the moment I left. Better to carry them back with me, even if their sweetness felt bitter now. The cold December air cut across my face as I stepped outside, sharper than her words, yet somehow kinder. Behind me, the door clicked shut with the precision of a vault, sealing me out not just from the house, but from a part of my daughter's life that no longer had room for me. The street outside glittered with decorations that should have lifted my spirit. Garlands strung across lampposts, windows glowing with candles, wreaths hanging on polished doors. But each twinkle felt like mockery, reminding me of a joy I had been denied. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly toward the bus stop, each step heavy, not from the weight of my bag, but from the ache that settled deep in my chest. The wind tugged at my scarf, carrying with it the sound of laughter from some nearby home where a family was gathering without shame or judgment. Once, Lydia and I had been like that. Once, it had been enough to share cocoa in chipped mugs and sing along badly to old carols until we both collapsed in laughter. I remembered one Christmas when she was 6. We didn't have money for a tree that year, so I brought home an old wooden ladder from the factory. We wrapped tinsel around it, strung lights across its rungs, and she declared it the most magical tree in the whole neighborhood. Her eyes had glowed brighter than the lights themselves, and she whispered, "Daddy, this is perfect." That memory clung to me now, a ghost of a time when love was simple and didn't need to be measured against someone else's standards. The bus shelter loomed ahead, its glass walls rattling slightly in the winter wind. I sat down on the cold bench, clutching the gift bag like it was the last connection I had to my daughter. Around me, other passengers shuffled, bundled in coats, muttering about the weather or their errands. They were ordinary people with ordinary worries. Somehow, their lives felt more real than the polished marble world I had just left behind. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard and moved to the back, pressing my forehead against the chilled window. As the city rolled past, I thought of Ruth, my late wife, and how fiercely she had loved Lydia. She would have known what to say tonight. She would have found a way to break through the wall our daughter had built around herself. Before she passed, she made me promise, "Take care of our little girl. No matter how she changes, never stop loving her." I had carried that promise like scripture for 20 years. But now I wondered, was loving her the same as letting her wound me again and again? The bus rattled through streets that grew less polished with each passing block. Christmas lights hung from modest porches, glowing warmly against the dark. I thought of how many nights I had worked double shifts to keep heat in our own small house, how many mornings I had gone without breakfast so Lydia could have lunch money, sacrifices I never once regretted. But as I stared at my reflection in the smudged glass, I asked myself the question that hurt the most. When did all of that stop being enough for her? The bus groaned as it turned down a familiar street, the rhythm of its engine beating against the silence in my head. I watched the neighborhoods change, the brownstones giving way to rows of smaller houses where the holiday spirit clung proudly in every window. Strings of lights blinked unevenly, wreaths hung a little crooked, and inflatable Santas sagged against the cold wind. But there was honesty in those decorations. They weren't meant to impress. They were meant to celebrate, to bring joy to children who pressed their noses against frosty glass and waited for Christmas morning. I envied those families, their unpolished happiness, the kind that didn't need marble floors or imported chandeliers to make it real. I thought of Lydia again, of how she used to cling to my arm when we walked through streets like these, pointing at every light, gasping as if each display was more magical than the last. She would tug me along, her mittened hand small and warm, her breath puffing clouds into the winter air. "Daddy, look, that one has reindeer." Those memories crowded my mind until they stung, because the little girl who once believed our ladder tree was enough had grown into a woman who thought I was unfit for her world. The bus jolted, sending me forward in my seat. I tightened my grip on the gift bag, though I knew she hadn't wanted what was inside. The tin of cookies felt heavier now, weighted with rejection. I imagined setting them on my kitchen table, eating them alone while the sound of distant church bells marked a holiday I was no longer part of. When the bus finally hissed to a stop in my neighborhood, I stepped out into the sharp air. My breath rose in white clouds, mingling with the faint smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. The 3-block walk to my house felt longer than usual, each step dragging as though my legs carried not just my body, but the years of sacrifice that had led to this moment. The key turned in the lock with its familiar click, and I pushed open the door to my small living room. The space was dark and quiet, the silence pressing against me in a way that felt heavier than the cold outside. My old brown recliner sat waiting in the corner, its fabric worn thin but welcoming in a way my daughter's immaculate sofa never could be. I lowered myself into it and closed my eyes, but the quiet offered no comfort. It only gave me room to replay the look on Lydia's face, that polite smile stretched thin over discomfort, the way she shifted her bracelet rather than take my hand. I tried to push the memory away, but another one took its place, the day of her graduation. I had stood there in a suit too big for me, holding flowers that wilted in the summer heat, watching her laugh with classmates who had never wondered if rent could be paid on time. She had smiled at me then too, but it was the same smile she had given me tonight, bright on the surface, cold underneath, and for the first time I began to wonder if I had been an embarrassment to her all along. The room seemed smaller than ever as the shadows stretched across the walls. I didn't turn on the lights right away. Instead, I sat in that old recliner, letting the dimness wrap around me like a blanket stitched from all the years gone by. On the side table sat the wooden box I hadn't opened in months, the one where I kept the things that mattered most. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the drawer open and pulled it out, the weight of it heavier than its size should allow. Inside were photographs, yellowed at the edges, but sharp enough to cut my heart. The first one I lifted was Lydia as a newborn, bundled in Ruth's arms. Her mother's tired eyes still shone with pride, and I remembered the way she whispered, "She's going to change the world, you'll see." I set it aside gently and picked up another, Lydia missing her 2 front teeth, beaming on her first day of school while I held her tiny backpack straps. Then came her prom photo, her dress the result of months of saving, her face radiant as she posed in front of our small house that we had tried so hard to make look special. But it was the wedding picture that froze me. Lydia in her white gown, her husband Damien standing tall beside her, the two of them framed perfectly between his parents, Victor and Eliza. They looked like a family portrait that had never needed me. And there I was, in the background, barely in focus, my suit the same one I had worn at her graduation. I studied her expression, the way her smile aimed toward her new in-laws, while her eyes passed over me as though I were part of the wallpaper. That photo told a story I hadn't wanted to see before. It wasn't just tonight that she had pushed me aside. The distance had been growing for years, a slow erosion I had mistaken for her finding independence. I thought she was building her own life, but in truth, she had been carefully stepping away from mine. I remembered how Damien barely shook my hand that day, his grip limp, his attention already scanning the room for people of more importance. I remembered Eliza asking me what I did for a living in that tone that wasn't curiosity, but confirmation, that I was someone beneath notice. I set the photo down, my chest heavy, and stared into the shadows. All those years of working double shifts, missing meals, patching shoes so she wouldn't feel different at school, all of it had built her a bridge into a world where I no longer had a place. I thought of Ruth again, her last words to me, in that hospital room. "Promise me you'll always love her, no matter what." I had kept that promise through every heartbreak and every insult, but love doesn't mean letting yourself be erased. In that moment, staring at that wedding photo, I realized the truth. I had already been erased a long time ago. I sat there for a long time, the photo of her wedding still burning in my mind, until finally I pushed the wooden box aside and reached deeper into the drawer. My fingers brushed against an envelope, stiff and sharp at the edges. I pulled it out, my heart thudding with the familiar mix of disbelief and secrecy I had felt every time I looked at it. The return address was still printed clearly in bold letters, Massachusetts State Lottery Commission. I slid the paper free and unfolded it slowly, almost reverently, as though it might crumble in my hands. Chatu. $1,000,000. I had won it back in October. A random ticket bought at a corner store on a whim, the kind of indulgence I allowed myself once in a blue moon. When the clerk scanned it, I thought he was joking. My knees nearly gave way when the numbers lit up on the screen. After taxes, it would come out to about 1.3 million, a number so large it barely felt real, a number that could change everything. But I hadn't told a soul, not my neighbors, not the few friends I still had left from the factory days, and certainly not Lydia. Something inside me, some instinct buried deep, had whispered caution. Hold it close. Don't speak. Don't let anyone know. And now, after tonight, I understood why. She would have seen it as a ticket into her in-laws' approval, a dowry of sorts, a way to finally prove I was worthy to sit among their marble and silk, but that's not what this money was for. I turned the slip of paper in my hands, its crisp edges catching the lamplight, and thought of Ruth. She would have been the first to laugh, to dream with me about what we could do. A new roof, maybe, or a trip somewhere warm in winter. But I was alone now, and the dreams I had left were not for myself. I thought of the promise I had made to her, to always love our little girl. I had kept it, even when it tore pieces out of me. But love, I realized, didn't mean surrender. It didn't mean sitting quietly while your only child decided you were unfit to be in her life. The ticket glowed faintly in the dim light, like it was alive in my hand. I felt its power, raw, undeniable. It wasn't just money, it was choice, it was voice. It was the chance to show my daughter and her perfect circle of in-laws that worth wasn't measured in polished accents or dinner table debates. Worth was sacrifice, resilience, loyalty. Worth was a father who had given everything and could still rise again, stronger. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir in me. Not sadness, not resignation, but resolve. I placed the lottery slip carefully back into its envelope, but the weight of it lingered in my hands long after it was hidden again. For weeks I had wrestled with what to do, turning it over in my mind during sleepless nights, imagining possibilities I had never dared to dream. A bigger house, a new car, comfort in my final years. But none of those ideas ever sat right with me. They felt shallow, hollow, as though they belonged to someone else's life. Tonight, however, the decision came into focus, as clear as ice on a window pane. Lydia had tried to erase me, to tuck me neatly out of sight where I wouldn't trouble her refined existence. But I still had one thing she could never take away, the power to show the world who I truly was. I leaned back in the recliner, listening to the hum of the radiator, and a plan began to take shape. I wouldn't spend this money on myself. I wouldn't spend it on her either. I would use it to make a statement so loud that marble walls and crystal chandeliers couldn't muffle it, something she would never forget. I thought of Ruth again, of her tender hands clasped around mine in the hospital bed. Love her, no matter what. I would honor that promise, but not by bending beneath Lydia's indifference. No, this would be an act of love that carried a lesson inside it, one she could never mistake. I imagined her face when he saw me on television, the father she thought too small, too simple, suddenly commanding the attention of an entire city, not for wealth, not for vanity, but for something greater. I pushed myself up and shuffled toward the kitchen, the old floorboards creaking under my weight. In the drawer next to the stove lay the phone book, frayed at the edges from years of use. I flipped through it slowly, my finger tracing over pages until I landed where I needed to. Attorneys, estate planning, trusts, donations. If I was going to do this, I had to do it properly. It wasn't enough to make a gesture. I needed it to last, to mean something long after I was gone. Tomorrow was Sunday. Offices would be closed, but Monday morning I'd start making calls. I'd find someone who could help me build this idea into reality. And while I waited, I would keep shaping the vision in my mind, sharpening it like a blade. Lydia thought I wasn't ready for her sophisticated company. She believed I couldn't hold my own among people who measured worth in pedigree and polish. She was wrong. I had lived through hardship they couldn't imagine. I had survived loss they would never endure. And now, with this ticket, I had the means to prove it. The envelope sat on the table, quiet but alive, its promise humming in the air. For the first time in years, I felt awake. A storm had begun to form inside me, and this time I would be the one to decide when and where it broke. Monday morning arrived gray and bitter, the kind of cold that makes the air itself feel sharp enough to cut. I dressed carefully, buttoning my best shirt beneath an old wool sweater, and slipped the lottery envelope into the inside pocket of my coat. It felt like armor, a reminder that I wasn't powerless anymore. The city bustled as I rode the bus downtown, people shuffling in heavy coats, clutching coffee cups, already lost in the rhythm of their routines. I clutched the yellowed phone book page I'd torn out the night before, a list of estate lawyers whose names carried weight I couldn't yet pronounce. But before I called any of them, there was someone else I needed to see. Wesley Grant, old friend, once a co-worker on the assembly line, now a seasoned journalist with his face on the evening news. Back then, he'd been the sharp one, scribbling in notebooks during lunch breaks, always chasing stories even when all we had were greasy sandwiches and tired hands. We lost touch when the factory downsized, but I'd watched him climb the ladder, his voice growing familiar in households across Boston. If anyone could help me make sure this plan wasn't ignored, if anyone could give it the kind of platform that would reach Lydia's polished world, it was Wesley. I called him from a payphone outside a diner we used to haunt after long shifts. The line clicked, and his voice came through, older, but still carrying that quick, alert energy I remembered. "Harlan? My God, it's been years. What's going on?" I hesitated, feeling the words claw at my throat. "I have something for you. A story. One that'll mean more than politics or weather reports. Meet me at O'Malley's Cafe tomorrow, 10 sharp." His tone shifted instantly, the way a hound stiffens at the scent of prey. "Is this about the lottery rumors I've been hearing?" I let a smile tug at my mouth. "You'll find out when we meet." The next morning, I was there early, sitting at a corner table with a cup of bitter coffee that tasted more like memory than comfort. The place hadn't changed, still smelled of fried eggs and burnt toast, the kind of place that gave shelter to tired men who had no more dreams left. Wesley came in right on time, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, suit sharp enough to slice through the gloom. He spotted me and broke into a grin that softened the lines of his face. "Harlan, you look different. What's happened?" I gestured for him to sit. "I've got a story for you, Wesley. A Christmas story, the kind people will remember." He leaned in, hungry, his pen already in hand. "Well, what is it?" I shook my head, letting the suspense hang between us. "Not yet. You'll hear it live. Just clear your schedule for December 23rd at 2 o'clock. Make sure the cameras are rolling." He stared at me, baffled, but something in my tone made him nod slowly. "Whatever you're planning, Harlan, it better be good." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness roll across my tongue, and whispered, "It'll be more than good. It'll be unforgettable." The days that followed moved with a strange kind of urgency, as though time itself was leaning forward, waiting for what I was about to do. For years my life had been slow, routine, a series of shifts and quiet nights, but now every hour carried purpose. I woke earlier than usual, shaved more carefully, even pressed my old shirts before putting them on. If I was going to step into the light of this city, I needed to look like someone the world would listen to, not just a tired man from a forgotten neighborhood. On Wednesday, I walked into a clothing store I'd only ever admired from the outside. The mannequins in the windows wore suits that cost more than my entire month's pension, but I pushed the revolving door and forced myself to stand tall as the warmth and scent of cologne enveloped me. A young salesman approached, his smile professional but guarded, his eyes flicking down to my worn shoes. "Good afternoon, sir. Looking for something in particular?" I met his gaze. A suit, navy blue, something that makes a man look like he belongs anywhere. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but he led me through gleaming racks of fabric. When I touched the wool of one particular suit, I felt the difference immediately. Strong, fine, a texture that spoke of permanence. The price tag nearly made me flinch, but I steadied myself. Sometimes you need to look like $1 million even before you prove you have it. The fitting took an hour, pins tightening fabric against my shoulders and waist, mirrors surrounding me from every angle. I barely recognized the man staring back. Straighter posture, steadier eyes, someone who commanded space instead of apologizing for taking it. "You wear it well, sir," the tailor said softly. "We can have the alterations finished by Friday." The next morning, I visited an old barber shop tucked on the corner of a street where cobblestones still poked through the asphalt. The barber, an Italian man with more years than I could guess, didn't ask many questions. He simply draped the cape over me and went to work with steady hands trimming away decades of neglect. When he finished, I looked 20 years younger, my jawline sharp again, my hair neat, my face free of the gray stubble that had long been my armor. At home, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for hours, rehearsing. I practiced how to hold my shoulders, how to let my voice carry without straining, how to look into a lens as if I were speaking directly to every soul watching. Again and again, I repeated the words I wanted to say, about love, about value, about what truly matters, until the sentences rolled off my tongue like scripture. In the evenings, I sat at the library, poring over information about orphanages across Boston, reading their Christmas wish lists, learning how many children would wake up to nothing if no one stepped in. Their faces began to fill my imagination, displacing the cold memory of Lydia's dismissal. By Friday, when I returned to collect the altered suit, the salesman barely recognized me. "Mr. Carter," he said with genuine surprise, "you look incredible." I smiled faintly, thinking of how Lydia and her in-laws would see me soon, not as the man they dismissed, but as someone who could command the attention of an entire city. This wasn't just clothing, it was armor, and the battle was only days away. Saturday morning dawned with a pale winter sun, its light spilling weakly across the frost that clung to my windows. I sat at my kitchen table, a pad of paper before me, and began making calls. The first number connected me to St. Matthew's Haven, a small orphanage on the south side. A tired voice answered, a woman named Mrs. Delgado, who introduced herself as the director. I told her I wanted to know what they needed most for Christmas. For a moment there was silence on the line, and then her voice softened, almost breaking. "Sir, we have 46 children here. Most of them won't have anything under the tree unless we provide it. Clothes, shoes, books, anything would help. But more than that, knowing someone cares, that would mean the world." I scribbled her words carefully into my notebook. Then I made another call, this time to Greenwood House, a facility for older kids who had long since been passed over by adoption. The director, a man with a voice that carried both weariness and hope, told me they had 22 teenagers. "They're too old for the toy drives," he explained. "People forget about them, but they still need warmth, support, something to remind them that they matter." The third call took me to Horizon Home, a center dedicated to keeping siblings together. 38 children there, some as young as 4, some nearly grown, all clinging to one another so they wouldn't be separated. The director choked up as she described their needs: winter coats, blankets, school supplies, anything that would ease their days. By the time I set the phone down, my list was filled with numbers that carried far more weight than their size. 46, 22, 38, 106 children in total. 106 faces that could light up on Christmas morning if someone gave them reason to believe they mattered. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the figures until they blurred. These children knew what it meant to feel unwanted. They understood being cast aside. In them, I saw a reflection of myself, standing outside Lydia's gleaming home, told I wasn't good enough to enter. I closed the notebook gently and pressed my hand against it. This, I realized, was what the money was meant for. Not for impressing people who would never value me, not for buying a seat at a table where I was already unwelcome. It was for these children, children who would treasure even the smallest kindness because they had so little. The suit hanging in my closet, the haircut, the rehearsed words, all of it was preparation for this. The city would hear my voice, yes. Lydia and her in-laws would see me, yes. But more important than all of that, 106 children would wake up to joy. For the first time since Ruth passed, I felt I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and this time I would not be invisible. Monday arrived heavy with gray clouds, the kind that pressed low over the city, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. I rose early, dressing with a care I hadn't given myself in years. The navy suit hung ready in the closet, crisp from its final fitting, and when I slid into it, I felt taller, stronger, like a man reborn. The white shirt gleamed, the tie lay straight against my chest, and when I looked into the mirror, I no longer saw the weary factory worker who shuffled through life unnoticed. I saw a man who carried a purpose, a man who was ready to be heard. The bus ride downtown felt different this time. I sat upright, not hunched the way habit had taught me. The other passengers glanced my way, some offering polite nods, others staring briefly before looking away. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, I looked like I belonged in the heart of the city, not its forgotten corners. The envelope holding the lottery papers pressed lightly against my chest pocket, a silent reminder of what was at stake. When I reached the towering glass building that housed the television station, I paused for a moment on the sidewalk. The place shimmered with polished brass and spotless windows, a palace of news and image-making. Years ago, I might have walked past it without daring to glance inside. Today, I pushed the door open as though I had every right to be there. The lobby buzzed with energy. Screens on every wall flashed headlines, anchors rehearsed lines, staff hurried past with clipboards and headsets. I approached the security desk, my shoulders squared. "Good afternoon," I said firmly. "I'm here to see Wesley Grant." The guard tapped at his keyboard, glanced at his screen, then at me. He handed me a visitor badge without hesitation. 21st floor, Mr. Carter. Elevators to your left." The elevator ride gave me time to steady myself, to rehearse the first lines once more in my head. By the time the doors opened, I was ready. Wesley was waiting, his smile wide, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. My God, Harlan, you look like a man who's been keeping secrets. You ready for this? Ready as I'll ever be, I told him. He led me through a maze of cubicles, voices rising and falling like the hum of a hive. Producers waved, technicians adjusted equipment, the air electric with anticipation. Studio B is set up, Wesley said as he held the door open for me. Best crew we've got. We'll do this live. Inside, bright lights stood like sentinels around the set. Cameras glinted on their tracks, cables snaked across the floor, and two chairs faced each other across a small table emblazoned with the station's logo. A producer clipped a microphone to my lapel, her hands steady and professional. Natural voice, sir. Just speak as you would at home. I took my seat, the heat of the lights bathing me, and drew a deep breath. In minutes, the city would be watching. In minutes, Lydia would see the man she had cast aside, and for the first time, the world would know my story, not from her lips, but from mine. The countdown began with the producer's hand raised, her fingers folding one by one. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A red light bloomed on the camera like an unblinking eye, and suddenly the room fell into a silence that buzzed with expectation. Across from me, Wesley's transformation was instantaneous. Gone was the old friend I'd shared greasy sandwiches with on our breaks at the factory. In his place sat the polished journalist, posture perfect, voice measured, smile honed to carry warmth through a television screen. "Good afternoon, Boston," he began, his tone smooth as velvet. "Today we bring you a special holiday story, one that may restore your faith in generosity and remind us what Christmas is truly about. With me is a longtime friend, Mr. Harlan Carter, who has something extraordinary to share with all of us." He turned to me, his eyes twinkling with both curiosity and trust. "Mr. Carter, the floor is yours." My heart thudded once, hard, and then steadied. I leaned slightly forward, the microphone catching the tremor in my breath. "A month ago, something unexpected happened to me," I began, my voice firm but carrying a softness that surprised even me. "I won the Massachusetts Mega Jackpot Lottery, $2 million. Behind the camera, I saw the producer freeze, her clipboard sagging in her hand. Wesley's eyebrows shot up, though his training kept him composed. "2 million, he repeated, his voice carrying the amazement the audience surely felt. "And you've kept this a secret until now?" I nodded. Not a soul knew, not my neighbors, not my daughter, no one. I pulled the envelope from my breast pocket, holding it steady so the camera could zoom in on the official papers, the winning numbers shining like a key to another life. After taxes, about 1.3 million. Enough to change everything. Wesley leaned closer, his voice hushed, intimate. "And what do you plan to do with it?" I let the silence hang, then unfolded the documents I had prepared. "I'm giving it all away, every last dollar, not to banks, not to family members hoping for a windfall, but to children who have been left behind, who wake up each day without parents to remind them they matter. 3 orphanages here in Boston, St. Matthew's Haven, Greenwood House, and Horizon Home, 106 children in total. By Christmas morning, every one of them will know they are loved." The studio air shifted, thick with disbelief and awe. Even the camera crew had stopped adjusting their equipment. Wesley's voice cracked slightly as he asked, "But why give it all away, Harlan? Why not keep at least some for yourself?" This was the moment I had rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. Happiness isn't measured in bank accounts. "Counts," I said, my gaze fixed on the camera lens as if speaking to every living room in the city. "It's measured in love, in giving, not in demanding. Some parents forget that, some children too. But love is not a performance for others. It's the one gift that only grows when you give it away." Wesley blinked rapidly, fighting emotion, then reached across and took my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with sincerity, "this city has just witnessed a true Christmas miracle." The red light on the camera dimmed, and in the silence that followed, I knew everything had changed. The broadcast reached living rooms across the city before I had even left the studio. In diners where workers nursed steaming cups of coffee, in small apartments where families crowded around old televisions, in penthouses with views of the harbor, my face filled the screen. I sat there in my navy suit, calm, certain, declaring to the world that $1.3 million would be given to children who had nothing. For some, it was just another news story. But for others, it was a reminder that kindness still had teeth, that generosity could still roar louder than greed. 20 minutes north, in Lydia's townhouse, The television glowed against marble walls and polished silver frames. She sat curled on a leather sofa, her husband Damien lounging beside her, his parents occupying the high-backed chairs that looked more like thrones than furniture. The news anchor's introduction barely caught their attention. Eliza muttered about turning the channel. "I'm tired of these sentimental segments, always so contrived," but Damien held the remote loosely, distracted by the face now speaking on the screen. "Wait," he said slowly, narrowing his eyes. "I know that man." And there I was, holding up the lottery slip, my voice filling their immaculate room. A month ago, I won $2 million. I decided to give every cent to 106 children in 3 orphanages across Boston. The teacup slipped from Lydia's hand, clattering against its saucer, spilling amber liquid across the pristine glass table. Her chest rose sharply, eyes widening as if she had seen a ghost. "That's—" her voice broke. "That's my father." Her words hung in the room, absurd and undeniable all at once. Damien sat up, disbelief flooding his face. Eliza straightened in her chair, her lips parting, as if the sentence had offended her ears. "Your father?" she repeated. "That man on television? The one giving away millions?" Victor's brow furrowed, his voice sharp as he leaned forward. "Why didn't you know about this? How could your own father hide something like that from you?" On the screen, I spoke the words I had carved into myself all week. Happiness isn't about what you accumulate. It's about who you love and who you choose to lift up. Lydia's throat tightened, her hands fumbling for her phone. Her polished world trembled at its foundation. In front of her in-laws, the father she had dismissed as unfit was suddenly larger than life, his voice rising above marble and crystal, commanding not only their attention, but the attention of an entire city. The room fell into a silence more suffocating than any words. The only sound was my voice from the television, calm and unshaken, telling them all what true worth really meant. The silence in that gleaming living room, stretched like glass about to shatter. Damien was the first to break it, his voice sharp enough to cut. $2 million. Given away? Have you lost your mind, Lydia? That money should have been ours. His face flushed red as he leapt from the sofa, pacing across the polished floor, his designer shoes striking like hammers with each step. Eliza's crystal glass trembled in her hand. She set it down with deliberate care, her eyes narrowing. "Lydia, how could you not know about this? Your father wins the lottery, becomes front-page news, and you're sitting here blindsided like the rest of us?" Her words carried venom wrapped in silk, the kind of accusation that bruised deeper than it sounded. Lydia's fingers shook as she unlocked her phone. "He never told me," she whispered, almost to herself. "He never said a word." The memory of just 8 nights ago struck her like a physical blow, the way she had brushed me aside, declaring me unfit for the company of her sophisticated guests. The timing was no coincidence. She felt it now. He had kept this from her deliberately, as a lesson, as revenge. Victor leaned forward, his voice cold and measured, like a judge delivering a sentence. $2 million could have secured this family's future. It could have been invested, multiplied, preserved for generations. Instead, it's being squandered on strangers. On the television, my image leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. Some parents forget that love is not measured in wealth. Some children, too. Lydia's face drained of color. She jabbed her father's number into her phone with trembling fingers. The line rang once, twice, and then fell into voicemail. She tried again, faster this time, her breath shallow. Voicemail again, again. She called a third time, a fourth, her desperation mounting with every unanswered ring. Damien stopped pacing and turned on her with fury in his eyes. "How could you not know? How could you let him do this without telling us? What kind of daughter are you?" His words were laced with disbelief and rage, a storm she had never seen from him before. Eliza's voice, though quieter, cut deeper, the kind who is embarrassed of her father, perhaps, the kind who forgets where she came from. Lydia's chest heaved as she stared down at her phone, her father's voicemail greeting echoing in her ears. The man she had dismissed had just shattered her carefully built world with a single act of generosity, and no matter how many times she called, he wasn't answering. Back in my modest house, the glow of the television had already faded, but the silence that followed was filled with a satisfaction I hadn't tasted in years. I hung my suit carefully in the closet, smoothing the fabric with deliberate care, and changed back into the clothes that felt like me. Worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and slippers Ruth had bought long before she passed. The navy armor had done its work. The world now saw me, not as an invisible old man, but as someone worth listening to. My phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating like an insect trapped beneath glass. Lydia's name lit the screen. I let it ring, my chest rising with calm breaths as the sound echoed through the quiet kitchen. When it stopped, it began again, relentless. A dozen calls. Thus, and 24, piling one after another until the screen recorded her desperation. I turned the phone face down and poured myself a cup of tea, the steam rising soft and sweet. I carried the mug to my recliner, sinking into its familiar embrace, and turned on the 6 o'clock news. As promised, my story led the broadcast. The anchor's voice was bright with awe. Tonight, Boston meets a man who reminded us of the true spirit of Christmas. Behind her, footage rolled of me holding the lottery slip, my words about love and giving replayed for the city to hear once more. Clips followed of interviews with the orphanages, directors choking back tears as they explained what the donation would mean. A true Christmas miracle, one reporter called it. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the warmth, and let the words wash over me. On the screen, strangers praised me, children's faces lit up, and my name carried respect in places it had never reached before. Not because I was wealthy, but because I had chosen to give. For the first time in decades, I felt taller even while sitting down. My phone lit up again. This time it was Damien's number, though I knew it was Lydia's voice waiting on the other end. Then came another call, another, the counter climbing higher. 30 missed calls, then 40. I thought of how many times I had sat in that same chair waiting for her to visit, waiting for her voice on the line, waiting for anything at all. The phone had always been silent then, but now that money was involved, it rang like an alarm bell. I set the cup down, leaned back, and closed my eyes. The city could talk all it wanted. Lydia could call until her fingers cramped, but I already had what I needed. The approval of strangers meant little compared to the feeling that pulsed quietly in my chest. I had turned pain into purpose. I had taken rejection and built something that no mansion, no polished in-laws, no dismissive smile could erase. For once, I wasn't the forgotten man. For once, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The calls didn't stop. By the time darkness pressed against my windows, my phone showed more than 70 missed attempts. Lydia's number, Damien's, even one from an unfamiliar landline that I suspected belonged to his parents. Each one I ignored, the buzzing vibrating faintly against the wood of my kitchen table until it seemed to shake the whole room. Once, I might have answered after the first ring, desperate for any scrap of connection, but tonight I let them pile up like snow against a door I no longer intended to open. Around 9 o'clock, the sound outside changed. Headlights swept across my curtains, and a car door slammed. I didn't need to look to know who it was. A moment later, sharp knocking rattled my front door. "Dad?" Her voice was muffled, but the edge of desperation carried through. "Dad, I know you're in there. Please open the door. We need to talk." I sat in my recliner, tea cooling in my hands, staring at the door as though it belonged to another world. The knocking grew harder, faster, until it became pounding. "Dad, this is ridiculous. Please, just open up." I could hear the strain in her voice, the crack of panic seeping through the polished veneer she wore so carefully in public. She tried the handle, found it locked, and rattled it like a child again, though she was no longer a child. My eyes drifted to the photograph on the side table. Ruth holding baby Lydia in the hospital, both of them smiling with a trust I'd carried for decades. I whispered softly, almost to Ruth's image. She said I wasn't ready for her world. Now let her see what it feels like to be shut out. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of her leaning against the doorframe, shoulders trembling. She might have been crying, though the frost on the glass blurred the details. For a brief moment, the father in me wanted to rise, to open the door, to gather her in and say everything was forgiven. But the ache of her dismissal was still fresh, and forgiveness without understanding was just surrender. After 10 more minutes, her knocking weakened. The sound of her heels clicked back across the walkway, sharp in the frozen air. A car engine roared to life, then faded into the distance. Silence returned, steady and comforting, like an old friend settling beside me. I lifted my tea again, sipping slowly, and let the warmth chase away the last chill of her visit. My phone buzzed once more, registering her latest attempt, call number 82. I didn't answer. Tonight, the lesson belonged to her, and for once I would not let my love excuse her cruelty. Christmas Eve morning broke clear and bright, the kind of winter day that made the city look like it had been dusted with silver. I rose earlier than usual, feeling lighter despite the heaviness of the night before. The phone still sat silent on the counter, its screen littered with missed calls and unread messages, but I ignored it. Today wasn't about Lydia. Today was about something far greater. I dressed in clean jeans, a thick sweater Ruth had knitted years ago, and my warm coat. The navy suit stayed in the closet. I didn't need to look like a businessman for the people I was about to see. I only needed to look like myself. The first stop was Horizon Home, the orphanage that housed 38 children bound together by blood and circumstance, siblings who had fought tooth and nail not to be separated. When I arrived, news crews were already waiting, their vans parked out front, antennas stretching into the pale sky. Reporters crowded near the entrance, microphones in hand, eager to capture every detail of this so-called Christmas miracle. I walked past them quietly, offering no comment, and stepped into the main hall where the children were gathered. The room erupted in squeals and laughter. Boxes wrapped in bright paper lined the tables. Bicycles leaned against the walls. Shelves brimmed with books and toys. One little boy, no more than 7, rushed up to me and threw his arms around my waist. "Uncle Harlan, thank you for the bike. You're like Santa Claus." His hug was fierce, desperate, as though he feared I might disappear if he let go. The director, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispered, "You've given them more than gifts. You've given them hope." From Horizon, I moved on to St. Matthew's Haven. 46 children crowded into a small chapel-turned gathering space, their eyes wide as they unwrapped coats, dolls, puzzles, shoes. The sound of joy filled the air so thickly it drowned out everything else. A little girl in a pink sweater clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest and said softly, "Nobody ever gave me something just for me before." I knelt down and told her, "You are worth more than you know." Her eyes glistened like the morning frost. The final stop was Greenwood House. 22 teenagers, most of them carrying the kind of hard edges life had carved too early. They stood taller than the little ones, but their eyes betrayed a yearning just as deep. One boy approached me, his voice steady but quiet. "You didn't have to do this. People forget about kids like us." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Not today. Not ever again." As I left Greenwood, the reporters closed in. Microphones shoved toward my face, cameras flashing, voices demanding answers. "How does it feel to change so many lives, Mr. Carter?" I paused, meeting their gaze with steady calm. "It feels like Christmas." That was all I said, and it was enough. By the time I returned home that afternoon, the city was buzzing louder than I had ever known it. Every radio station, every television channel, every corner diner seemed to be talking about what had happened. A retired factory worker, they said, had given away his entire fortune to children who had nothing. News anchors called it the story of the season. Commentators debated it on air, but all came to the same conclusion. This was the kind of generosity that reminded people of what the holiday was meant to be. At Horizon Home, cameras had caught Marcus, the boy who hugged me like he'd never let go, riding his new bicycle in circles while the other children cheered. At St. Matthew's, footage showed rows of kids clutching their gifts like treasures, their faces glowing brighter than the lights strung across the chapel. And at Greenwood, a group of teenagers had gathered around a new stack of books and jackets, their laughter echoing in the halls, clips of their joy replayed on every screen, their voices mixing with mine as I'd said, "It feels like Christmas." But while the city celebrated, another living room sat steeped in tension. In Lydia's townhouse, the same broadcasts played on their wide television. Only this time, she didn't look away. She sat frozen, her phone in her lap, the screen still filled with unanswered calls. Damien paced behind her, fury etched across his face. His parents sat stiff in their chairs, silent but seething, their world of superiority unraveling thread by thread. On the screen, I smiled warmly as a child wrapped small arms around my waist. The reporters' voices rose with awe, describing my decision as selfless, transformative. Lydia's chest tightened with every word. Her father, the man she had called unfit, the man she had turned away, was now the symbol of love and generosity for an entire city, and she had no part in it. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone again, dialing my number with frantic urgency. It rang, then rang again before cutting to voicemail. She tried once more, her voice breaking as she whispered to the empty line, "Dad, please talk to me." But I didn't answer. I was at my kitchen table, a simple meal before me, listening faintly as the evening broadcast replayed highlights of the day. My name was on every tongue, but I didn't crave their praise. What mattered were the children's faces, the gratitude in their eyes, the way their laughter had filled the halls and erased years of silence inside me. For the first time since Ruth's passing, I felt whole. The love I had puce. Red Out had come back to me in ways money could never buy. The city might call it a miracle, but I knew the truth. It was simply the choice to love where others had turned away. And in that choice, I had found something Lydia and her in-laws could never own. Peace. The snow had started to fall again by evening, soft flakes drifting past the window and settling on the quiet street outside. I sat in my recliner, watching the glow of Christmas lights flicker in the houses across from mine. Families were gathering, children laughing, parents carrying trays of food, grandparents welcomed at the door with hugs that lingered. Through those windows, you could see the kind of wealth money couldn't measure. It was the kind that came from belonging. My mind wandered to Lydia's townhouse, to its marble floors and polished chandeliers. I imagined them sitting there in silence, tension thick in the air, her in-laws whispering accusations, Damien pacing like a caged animal. The grand house with its flawless decorations would feel cold tonight, colder than the winter outside. All the crystal and silver in the world couldn't warm a room when love had gone missing. In contrast, the orphanages I had visited that morning pulsed in my memory. Horizon Home filled with shrieks of joy as children unwrapped bicycles and toys. St. Matthew's glowing with laughter as little ones clutched their new coats and shoes. Greenwood alive with teenagers who, for once, weren't forgotten. Those rooms had been humble, their walls scuffed, their furniture worn, but they radiated more warmth than Lydia's entire estate. I thought of the boy at Greenwood, his voice steady as he told me, "People forget about kids like us." The truth of it struck me hard. People forget anyone who doesn't fit neatly into their vision of importance. I had been forgotten too, by my daughter, by the very person who should have remembered me most. But those children had looked at me with eyes that said I mattered. To them, I wasn't an embarrassment. I wasn't out of place. I was someone who cared, and that was enough. The phone sat silent on the table beside me, though its screen glowed with the record of unanswered calls, 93 in total. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. For years I had lived hoping for Lydia's approval, aching for her to see me as more than a shadow in her perfect world. But tonight I understood something Ruth had always known. Family is not always about blood. Family is about love, about who shows up when you need them, about who makes you feel like you belong. The children I'd met today, those 106 souls, were now part of my family. Their joy had filled the hollow space in my chest where regret used to live, and as I watched the snow fall steady and quiet, I realized I no longer needed Lydia's world to make me whole. I had found my own. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that made the city sparkle as though it had been remade overnight. Sunlight glinted off the snow that blanketed the streets, and the church bell rang out in the distance, steady and full of promise. I stood by my window for a long time, watching children from the neighborhood tumble into the drifts, their laughter rising like music. Some carried new sleds, some waved scarves freshly unwrapped, and in their joy, I saw reflections of the faces I had visited the day before, the 106 children whose lives had been changed not by fortune alone, but by the reminder that they were loved. In the quiet of my small home, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat once more in the recliner that had carried me through countless nights of doubt. But today felt different. The weight I had carried for years, the ache of being unseen, the sting of rejection, seemed to have melted away, replaced by something far stronger. Peace. Not the shallow kind found in silence, but the deep, steady kind that grows when you know you have done right. Ruth would have smiled at this. I could almost hear her voice, gentle and certain. You kept your promise. You loved her, no matter what. And though Lydia had turned me away, though she had built walls of marble and glass between us, my love had not ended. It had simply found a new place to live. I thought of her as I sipped my coffee, wondering if she sat now in her immaculate townhouse, surrounded by gifts that carried no meaning, her in-laws' voices sharp with blame. I wondered if she finally understood that love cannot be measured in sophistication or polished manners, that wealth without kindness is nothing but emptiness, dressed in gold. Perhaps she would learn, perhaps she would not. Either way, I no longer needed her approval. My worth had been proven, not in her world, but in the laughter of children who would never forget this Christmas. The phone remained dark on the table, and for once, I felt no urge to reach for it. Let it rest. I had answered in a greater way than any call could demand. Outside, the city stirred with life, neighbors greeting one another, carolers moving from house to house. True wealth was all around me, in smiles, in embraces, in the simple act of being together. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the warmth of the coffee and the hum of the radiator surround me. I had given away every cent of that ticket, but in return I had gained something more valuable than all the money in the world, the knowledge that my life had mattered, that I had left love behind where it was most needed. And now, to you listening to my story, I ask one final thing. Share this tale if it touched you, and tell me in the comments what love means to you, because in the end, love is the only treasure worth keeping. Thank you for being here with me, and may you carry that treasure wherever you go.